We're back with Kerry Kiernan. He's a candidate for Court of Appeals, New Mexico Court of Appeals. And
Correct.
I want to clear that way, in case it airs somewhere else. Then
Right.
you can, I think my question that I wanted to ask you was, how has electronic age changed the way we do research, specifically legal research, and how does that, have they managed to keep certain archives for common law and things like that? Do you feel that anything has changed as far as the electronic age?
Yeah.
Because I know we could do research on our iPhones now.
We can, and we used to have to do it in books, so you can be much more effective because now you can type in a term, for instance, to the computer, and the computer can pull up cases that use that term. Under the old manual system, it was hit and miss, and they would have certain key terms, but for some reason, if a court didn't use that key term in an opinion, you might not find it digested under that key term. But let me point out one thing that is a disadvantage about the electronic age. When I started practicing law, we didn't even have fax machines, so I know that makes me a dinosaur. But it made people think about what they wanted to respond in terms of sending letters to other lawyers. Nowadays, you get an email, and there's a tendency to think that you have to respond immediately. Or you get a fax, and there's a tendency to think that you have to respond immediately to this. You should be very careful about that principle. You should think, do I really want to say, sometimes you get very angry when you receive an email, or you want to shoot something back right away. You need to think about what your response is going to be. And I think sometimes this electronic age, we feel compelled to respond very quickly when we should think back, sit back and reflect about how we want to respond. So that's, I think, a disadvantage in the practice of law. But in terms of word processing, in terms of legal research, yes, things have sped up greatly.
So everything is compiled properly, you think? There's nothing as far as the technology is concerned that's affecting law in any way, right? Especially former cases and stuff. They're properly logged.
No, you can find them, yes. They're logged, they're in archives. The things that were in books are now on the computer. You can still do manual research, but yeah, so you can find, there's no inhibition in finding things and no barrier to finding things. I just think that one has to be careful when they email something. You can't get it back, obviously, and you need to make sure that your responses are, judicious and, level-headed. And so in the old days, of course, you'd pick up the phone or you could write a letter and think through something as opposed to quickly typing an email. Sure. And I think lawyers have to resist the urge to quickly respond to something without thinking about it.
When I was in, when you go to court, you see the judges with the computers next to them going through certain things. I think electronics have changed quite a bit as far as our Constitution is concerned, I think everything is safe vis-a-vis the electronic age and laws and how they're properly logged and everything. Anything that you can recommend as far as law students that are coming in coming out of law school? They just finished their bar exam. Anything that you can give them an advice on as far as how they can approach certain careers, like should they go into public defense? Should they go into private practice? What would you recommend, since you have both backgrounds? What would you say? Say they just wanted to be in private practice. Sufficient, you think?
No, I think it would be well, first of all, it depends who they're going to private practice with. I think it's very tough to start a private practice on your own because you don't have the experience.
So going in public is very necessary, you think?
I think if you could, I think what's necessary is to gain, if you want to be a litigation type lawyer, what's very necessary is to gain experience in the courtroom. So I would say look at the public defender or look at the district attorney because that's where you're going to get the most initial experience. If you want to be a transactional lawyer, and there are lawyers, contracts who never get into the courtroom, then you can go to a firm that specializes in transactions. So you may have some sense about what you want to do. Do I want to be in a courtroom or do I want to be behind a desk? And depending on what you want, there are certain avenues to go. But typically, the public sector gives you much more courtroom experience much more quickly than the private sector. Because if you're with a firm, you might tend to be behind a senior lawyer who would go to court and you would help that lawyer. But if you're on your own when you're in the public defender's office or the district attorney's office, you're often thrown into metropolitan court or district court very quickly and by yourself.
There's no lead attorney there.
No, in fact, I did my first jury trial in law school through the Centro Legal Criminal Defense Clinic. Now, I had to have a supervisor there, a professor, but I did my first 2-day jury trial as a law student. Setting aside the stress of that, it was a great experience. But it shows you that you can imagine when you're now a law school graduate and you go to the public defender's office, they expect you to get into court very quickly.
So there, I think that's a valuable experience, being in public defense, right? Whether
Whether it's prosecution or defense, it's a valuable experience, and it may teach you that you don't want to be a trial lawyer. You know, you may be reluctant to continue to add to the stress. You may change and go into commercial law. But if you want to get a sense about people, the system, and the courts, that's probably the best place to start. And then you'll see many of those people then go into private practice or start their own. Like if you're a prosecutor, they may go over to the criminal defense practice, you know, or they may go into private practice. And then they have that wealth of courtroom experience behind them.
I think a lot of the at least the new lawyers that I talk to, just coming out, they're taking their bar exam. They're unsure. I think a lot of times they're not sure. They don't have proper guidance there sometimes. Or sometimes they're conflicted between, should I go in private or should I go in public? Not much education there sometimes as far as what's beneficial for them. But this shows like this really guide them in some way. Well, you could do this. Look, he started out with the Court of Appeals.
Right.
And then he kind of worked his way through public defense.
Yeah, I've done it backwards, if you will, starting out in private practice, then going to the Court of Appeals, then going to the public defender, then back to private practice. So I'm saying to them there's no rhyme or reason. But they can always call a judge. They can ask, you know, sit down with a judge, talk to a judge about their experience, or call a prosecutor. That's why the clinical law programs at UNM are so good.
Do you work with the UNM law here?
I've done some work with them in terms of moot court, that kind of thing,
Correct.
but I haven't taught there. But those clinical law programs, and UNM is usually in the top 10 in the country in its clinical law programs, give the student the ability to actually deal with real cases and real people. They can then meet other lawyers through that and talk to those lawyers about career plans.
Correct. And this is a decent school, UNM law.
Look, you know, when I was going to UNM, I believe it was ranked first in clinical law in the country. Now, you know, there weren't that many programs, but it was the only mandatory clinical law program when I went. I don't know if that's still true across the country, but it is a fantastic criminal law program because, let me tell you, there's such a difference between practice and school,
Right.
and that gives you a bridge.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to be first, when you're running for judge, you have to have one partisan election there. What is that like? You're going all over the state?
Going all over the
30 seconds
state,
left,
seeing everyone, and you know, so one day you're in Alamogordo, one day you're in Farmington, but you need to see the people of the state in order to be able to represent the people
Well,
of the
they
state.
get to know you.
Absolutely.
Which is a good thing.
And they put a face to it, yes.
I think, so we'll have you back.
Well,
We'll
thank
come back.
you.
Maybe
Thank
you can talk to the chief judge there, Judge Kennedy, and have him come get on there.
Maybe we'll have him come. Thanks.
Thank you for coming in. That's it. We're out of time. We'll see you next time. Thank you.